Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. If the Phantom Navicomputer could speak, I'm pretty sure it would just go. They say that the Phantom is great for stealth missions, except for the fact that you can hear it going from at least 2 parsecs away. You've heard of the A-10 Warthog's terrifying Gatling gun, but you know what sounds scared stormtroopers on Lothal more than anything? The sound you're hearing here comes from the infamous Honda variable valve timing and lift electronic control, otherwise known as just VTEC. It's an infamous engine that has divided gearheads for decades now. After all, there's nothing sketchier than a 17-year-old with a fitted hat and a pack of Newports, or for this generation, that would just be a vape pen, who dropped only $1,000 for a Civic and an additional $3,000 on bolt-on poor life choices. This is the standard stereotype for those who worship the and who can blame them, honestly. You see, VTEC allows those smaller Japanese 4 and 6 cylinder engines to have excellent fuel economy, especially at lower RPMs. But at higher RPMs, the cam profile is altered, allowing more oxygen into the firing chamber, giving a pretty awesome boost in power and torque, depending on which model you're driving. And so in other words, VTEC is like the best of both worlds. It's dirt cheap, it's reliable, and it's also very fuel efficient, but when you do need that extra boost, it's there to make the VTEC just a little bit above average. You might say it's a perfect vehicle for some resource-poor, scrappy, and slightly sketchy rebels who are trying to fit into the commuter lanes with normal space traffic, but also can usually pop out and do something fun like carry out a terrorist attack or steal some military hardware. As a matter of fact, when I first saw the Phantom, I thought to myself, yup, these guys just bought a econo-sh box sleeper. Now in the show Ahsoka, we see Hera Syndulla flying the Phantom 2 while chasing that new Republic transport ship over some shipyards on Corellia. Remember Chopper wanted to bring that transport down along with the hyperdrive core? I'm not really sure what happens when those things blow up, but I'm pretty sure Chopper wants to find out.
Look at
You can't just shoot it down, it would crash into the port city. Just ready a tracking device.
I think it's absolutely adorable that Mama Hera still thinks that her little sociopathic droid can tell the difference between right and mass casualty event. Anyway, this little ship that Hera Syndulla is flying has a pretty awesome story and legacy behind it. So back in the day, Hera Syndulla led a rebel special forces unit known as the Spectres. This included the Jedi Kanan Jarrus, the Lasat warriors at Borrelios, the Mandalorian exile, Sabian Wren, and eventually Kanan's Padawan Ezra Bridger. Also Chopper, never forget Chopper, he will hold grudges and mess with you while you're sleeping. Since they were openly rebelling against the Empire in the Lothal sector, the crew of the Spectre had to call their ship, a VC-X-100 Corellian light freighter, their home, in order to keep mobile and evade capture. Now, Corellian Engineering Corporation's products had a really strong following among spacers who happened to be, overly confident and arrogant and also short on credits. You could say that CEC basically cornered that market. Their freighters were known for their ample interior space, robust space frames, which made these ships extremely popular among civilian pilots who wanted to modify and upgrade their ships, usually with defensive and offensive measures. Heck, even government factions relied on some of their larger models like the Gazanti-class cruiser and the CR-90 Corvette. The VCX series was one of the most impressive lines on offer by Corellian Engineering Corporation. These ships, unlike the more freight-oriented YT series, were known for their speed and standard armament. It's almost as if the manufacturers wanted their consumers to stop, bolting on aftermarket parts. Just take it as it is, Steve. The reputation of this freighter was quite good. So much so that Han Solo was actually able to use it as collateral at a high-stakes sabacc game to lure Lando Calrissian in.
I'm impressed. I don't think I'd have the nerve to gamble with something I love as much as my ship.
Really?
Yeah.
What are you flying?
VCX-100.
That is a quality ship, right, boys?
I'm impressed that the owner of the Millennium Falcon is impressed, which just goes to show you that a lot of people respect this ship, and for good reason. And on top of the VCX-100, or Ghost, as the Spectres called theirs, was a VCX series auxiliary starfighter, or Phantom 1, as the Spectres like to call it. In my opinion, this is one of the coolest aspects of the VCX-100 and helps really stand out from a pretty competitive field of Corellian freighters. With the VCX shuttle, the Ghost basically has its own fighter support and away shuttle, something reserved usually for much larger ships, and it gives the Spectres a great deal of flexibility, which is important when you're in the Special Forces. When the Spectres went on a mission to the world of Cetos, where they were trying to make contact with a group of Clone Wars era clones, you might recognize a few of them, the Phantom was used as an away ship, while Hera Syndulla remained in orbit to do repairs on the Ghost. When the Empire came to capture the Phantom and its crew, the Ghost Ghost was able to stay in hiding and out of trouble. Keeping your troops and ships separated gives you more options, and the VCX auxiliary shuttle gave you a lot more options. At first glance, this little thing looks just like a shuttle, especially when its wings are tucked inside of the fuselage. Now, in this smaller form, the ship performs at a lower level due to poor heat radiation. It's like VTEC at lower RPMs. It's less fuel consumption and less makes it a little bit more low-key. Also, with the S-foils tucked in, it makes the profile of the ship ridiculously small. The rebels have used this tiny shuttle to squeeze into many hangar bays and other nooks and crannies that something larger, like a T6 or the Ghost, would struggle to fit inside. And when you're raiding behind enemy lines without any real sort of backup, having a shuttle that can go anywhere is the difference between life or death. At just 11.63 meters in length, it's actually 2 meters shorter than an X-Wing. But unlike an X-Wing, you won't get the trauma of restless leg syndrome attacks on a long hyperspace ride from that coffin-like cockpit. Just like the T6 shuttle we talked about in our previous video, there's plenty of room for activities on board this shuttle. This includes 4 fold-up seats, but if you really wanted, you could probably fit at least, 8 or 10 people plus a pilot in this thing, making it comparable to a U-Wing when it comes to storage space. Typical Corellian Engineering Corporation type of design. I mean, I'm pretty sure even their escape pods could carry freight. And also, like most CEC designs, this shuttle will not be sticking out like a sore thumb. The U-Wing, on the other hand, screams, "I'm a military vessel, shoot at me." The Phantom, on the other hand, quietly whispers, "There's nothing inside of this econo-box." On one mission, when Ezra Bridger and Sabine Wren are jumped by a pair of Inquisitors and captured, Zeb Aurelius is able to set a trap for them by hiding a tiny shuttle while it's clamped onto the ceiling of a shuttle bay. Anything larger or heavier probably would not have stayed fixed in that position. But more importantly, the Phantom's boxy and unthreatening profile helped it blend into the ductwork and vents in the ceiling. On another mission, when the Spectres were trying to infiltrate a supermax prison known as the Spire, the Spectres were able to use the Phantom's low profile and low energy signature to do a covert landing. The Phantom has 2 different exit points. One was a small hatch that could be docked to a larger ship like the Ghost. The second was a ramp that was a bit more flexible for quick launch and retrieval operations. In this case, the Spectres used cloud cover to hide their approach, and then they would jump down onto the Spire from the rear ramp of the Phantom. I think a much larger ship would probably trip all the sensors and alarms in that building, making this extraction mission a lot more difficult. And just like any good econo-box sleeper, what's hidden inside of the Phantom 1 is far more interesting. For instance, the cockpit on this Phantom is upgraded and lifted straight out of a starfighter. This gives the pilot an optimal setup for flying this ship in a dogfight. The Phantom 1 is also equipped with twin laser cannons in the front. To the trained eye, that's a dead giveaway that this is more than just a mere shuttle. And if you take a closer look, there's also a turret on the top of the Phantom, which was useful because as small and mobile as the Phantom might be, TIE fighters and other dedicated starfighters were usually more agile and had better energy management. This turret still worked, by the way, when the Phantom was docked onto the Ghost, so it actually gives the Ghost more firepower, which is cool. And when the S-foils open, the power plant on board could generate more energy and more for the shields, weapons, and engine, making it an even more formidable vessel. In many ways, the S-foils are like the VTEC on the Phantom, and they're a dead giveaway that there's something more inside of this vessel. Usually only starfighters have S-foils on board because of the intense amount of energy and heat generated by their shields and lasers. But all great things must eventually come to an end, and, the Phantom would meet a pretty glorious end. You see, on one mission, the rebels are looking for more starfighters to include into their growing navy, and they noticed that a junkyard known as Reclam Station had a bunch of Y-Wings. This is a heavily guarded facility, and once again the rebels will need to rely on the tiny shuttle's incognito factor, speed, armor, and mobility to survive the insertion. And they almost don't make it, thanks to a group of dismantler droids guarding the facility. The Phantom, however, manages to dock with the station upside down and out of sight, and they give the rebels that important element of surprise. Spectre's squad ends up stealing more than a dozen Y-Wings, which will help the rebels do many great things in the future, like extract Mon Mothma from the Senate and launch an attack on Scarif, and also the first Death Star. Unfortunately, Ezra had to trigger an explosion to free these Y-Wings from the station, and that sends the entire station crashing down onto the surface of a gas giant it was built over, and the Phantom along with it. Rest in peace, Phantom. Ultimately, this was probably not the worst trade-off. I mean, you're getting a whole squadron of bombers for one ship, a very versatile ship, but it was the econo-box, so you can replace it. Now, about a year later, the Spectres are dropped off by Hera and Sabine Wren into an old Clone Wars-era munitions depot. The Rebels are surprised to find a bunch of droids still occupying the station, and they want to fight, as if the Clone Wars never ended. What's even more surprising is that the Rebels, who have Captain Rex in their ranks, agrees to support a ceasefire and join sides with the Separatist droids against an Imperial task force that comes to check out what's going on. In the confusion that follows, the Rebels were able to take control of an old Clone Wars-era Cephalopede-class transport shuttle and make it away. The Rebels would take that ship back with them and modify it, as one should always do when they get their econo-sh box. They made the ship compatible with the VC-X-100 shuttle docking bay. They added a new paint job, hull reinforcements, armored plating, forward and rear cannons, a ventral mounted turret laser, and of course that little astromech slot on the outside of the shuttle. I wonder if they did that on purpose because they were annoyed at Chopper and they wanted him on the outside of the ship. Because usually astromech slots are only created for starships that are too cramped to fit astromechs inside. The Phantom II actually has a lot of room inside. It's actually bigger than the Phantom I. The Phantom II also featured a Class 1 hyperdrive from the very beginning, unlike the Phantom I, which had to have one bolted on. The Cephalopede would serve the Spectres very well. It would live up to the Phantom name. And I'm not surprised that in Ahsoka, Hera is still flying around in this thing. I mean, that's another sign of a econo-sh box, longevity. Econo-sh boxes never die quiet deaths. They always go down in a blazing glory.